7:33. We have a number of items. Okay, this is being recorded, and it is available online. If you go to the village website and look at the meetings, you will see a link to it. And the sound recording is actually pretty good. I've been surprised at hearing members of the audience, residents speaking, as well as council members. So we're going to start. There are a few items that we have to introduce and pass today, certain resolutions to get the timing right, having to do with our budget and taxes. There has to be a certain amount of time between the introduction of these and final passage, and we don't do it tonight, we're not going to get it done in the fiscal year. So the first item is it's a resolution to approve levying a tax on certain real and personal property under the provisions of Section 6-203 of the tax property article of the code. What this does is we have had different tax rates for different kinds of property. Essentially, it was the business properties downstairs and everything else. And this involved, since the county will only collect the standard tax rate, they wouldn't do any of the collections on that. And we had to do it ourselves, and it was getting to be a nuisance. And so we have amalgamated all the properties under a single tax rate. And so that's what we're changing tonight. And there is it's the same thing that I have. There's a lot of whereases, but let me just, I said already what it was, to essentially approve a single tax rate on real and personal property. And so if this will resolve that the tax levied hereby be certified to the county council for Montgomery County, and that the Montgomery County be and hereby is authorized and directed to collect and pay over said tax to the village. Does anyone want to introduce this resolution?
I make a motion.
Make a motion to introduce. We have a second. Any discussion of it? Okay, let's move to a vote. Vote to approve. Aye. Good. That is so passed. So Bill introduced it. Josh seconded. 4-0. The second one is to adopt the budget, which we have discussed. It's been published in the newsletter. And this has to be done, it has to be passed by May 15th. Our meeting will be on May 14th, where we will have the final.
This is the introduction, right? We're not adopting it tonight.
Right, no, we're not adopting it. It has to be introduced, and then there's a certain length of time. That's why we're doing it tonight, to give the appropriate amount of time. So this is the budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015. It's fiscal year 2016. And where is the operative? There's a lot of whereases in here. Now, therefore, the village council does hereby adopt the foregoing ordinance, be it ordained and ordered, acting given by the Maryland Code and the village charter, that the attached budget be and is hereby adopted. And we have, as I said, discussed that several times in the council. And it has been published, and we have not heard a single word either for or against it. So, does somebody want to introduce this again? Bill is introducing it. Josh seconding. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It has hereby passed. And so that was fast. And so we move to the next items. The next and final item will be the selection of a member, the appointment, I always have to get the right language here, the appointment of a member to the Election and Ethics Committee. But before that, we will have time for residents' comments. If you have anything to say, I introduce your name and street. Yes, sir.
Steve Schmall, Summit Avenue. And I have two comments that are in totally different areas.
Okay.
The first one has to do with the action that you're going to take in closed session. Appointment of one or more people to the Elections and Ethics Committee. I have sent to the members of the council an email on the subject, but I don't believe that puts me officially on record. And therefore, at least I will want to give you a short version of what I said in the email, in which I made 4 points. The first one is, while I'm not necessarily opposed to having the committee expanded, which is one of the things I understand you're considering, I also haven't really heard any good arguments for doing so. The committee has been comprised of 3 people for years, and one of the things that would concern me is that it's sometimes difficult enough to get the committee assembled so they can do their work. You add 2 people to the committee and you make that much more difficult, especially with people living complex lives. Second, and this may have been done, and you will tell me, I'm sure, if it has, it had been suggested at the earlier meeting that you get input from the 2 sitting members of the committee, because they're going to be working with whomever you appoint. And I think it would be a disaster if they haven't at least had their say. That's not that they can control it. Third, and this is maybe the most important point I made, is that people who are considering appointment need to be aware, if they are not already, that they cannot do things like electioneer if they get on the committee. That's simply an absolute no-no. And the fourth thing is that people who are considering being on the committee and put their names forward might want to consider other involvement with the village, perhaps in lieu of serving on the committee. That takes care of that one. I can either stop now and take the other one up later.
If anyone wants to discuss any of these points.
No, that's very straightforward. Thank you.
Bill?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
You wanted to make the second point?
The other one
Second
has to do
issue?
with the budget, and I don't want to monopolize time here.
I'll go with the budget item.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I remain Steve Schmall on Summit Avenue. I have seen the budget. I haven't reviewed it carefully. There are a couple of things that concern me. First of all, on the revenue side, while I've heard the argument as to why you're trying to rationalize the 2 types of taxes, it strikes me that what is basically at stake here is loss of about $1,500 in exchange for making it administratively easier on the office. And I frankly don't think that's a very good reason. I think there was good reason to have a higher rate for businesses. It seems to comport with, I think, what other communities may do. Unless it were just out of line with other communities, I think you should maintain the 2 separate figures. Yes, do whatever is necessary to send out individual bills to the businesses. There aren't that many, and get more money. On the expenditure side, I think there needs to be perhaps more of a view, although I'm sure you've done some due diligence, into some of the contracts that we have. One in particular has to do with a variety of diverse services that are performed for the village. I had been trying to get information about what the hourly rate is that represents, to no avail. And I think since it represents anything from fairly professional work to total scut work, we may be paying too much money for that kind of service. And certainly, I think everybody on the council is interested in economics. I tend to be, people who know me, I've tended to support village budgets, even ones that may have some padding. This is one case where I think need to take a very careful view on how the monies are being spent. Thank you.
On that last point, we are moving forward with more consideration, public consideration of all of our contractual work, personal contract work. Bringing it forward, listing it, and so it'll be more visible in the future. Good, thank you. Any other comment? Yes, sir, on the back. Gentleman in the rear.
Richard Krajak from Bradley Lane. When the new election material went out, there was a new sentence added to absentee ballot about residents who temporarily reside outside the village can request ballots in person at the village, from the village manager. I hadn't seen that before. Who is that referring to? What's the
We looked into that, and according to the chairman of our election committee, who may want to speak to that personally, that in the past that has been applied only to people who are in hospital or university students, and they actually couldn't think of any people, any times that had actually been done. And so our council suggested that the whole definition of a resident and a voter needs to be updated in both the charter and the ordinance. And he has put it together some language to do that, also to make it consistent with the U.S. Constitution and as interpreted by the courts. So this whole area of who is a resident and who can be an elector and who can be a voter turns out like all of these things, you start looking more carefully and you start turning the rocks over, you find some things that have to be changed. But if the election committee wants to comment on their that interpretation, past interpretation of that, and I suggested to them that they continue this past practice of what they have done.
And in
informal.
the past, it is my understanding that college students who would at this time probably be taking finals would not be able to come in person. But I understand that they have in the past requested absentee ballots.
This is one of the classes of people who are not physically resident at the moment.
Right, but are continue to be resident of their parents' home,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
The intention is that
Yeah.
person, someone on their behalf could come in
Yeah.
person. So their parent or someone like that of that household who could come in person to get their ballot.
But they
Yeah.
can't apply in writing like the rest of us can reply in writing, or can apply. in
Presumably
writing.
they could.
And that's what they've always done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
this
what
would be a
they've
total
done.
Yeah.
It
change.
said specifically that they had to present themselves to the village manager
Yeah.
rather than to the election committee. Anyway, it seemed inconsistent with what's been going on.
That's, yeah, so we have requested that the committee, the election committee, continue to do their past practice.
Which is to say that the college students could write for an absentee ballot and would be sent it.
I believe so.
If
Would
there's
somebody
no
from the election
residents.
committee want to comment on that?
That's essentially correct. They can write and ask for it, and we will mail it directly to them, not to the person, if somebody else applies for it in their name. We'll accept that application too, but then we'll send the ballot directly to the absent person, so that we can send it back to us.
For the record, that was Ted Stoddard speaking.
Chairman of the election committee. Yes, Frank Correll.
Mr. Chairman, I think Ted is essentially correct, but going back to my own 7 years on the elections committee, we have always been prepared to accept the we have always been prepared to accept the assurance of the parent who has come in here to request an absentee ballot for their student who's out of town. Ted doesn't recall that we have issued any such ballots. I personally think we may very well have. I'm not quite sure now what that sentence actually says, but what it is designed to do, basically, and if it says that the person has to come and go to the village manager, that is not what was intended in that sentence was written, and I certainly would be the first to ask that it be clarified.
Okay.
What it is intended to do is to prevent someone from calling up and saying, hey, I got 2 kids in college, give me a ballot. What we're asking for is to come in, fill out the application for whom it is, and then we will send a ballot to wherever that individual is located.
Good, thank you.
And that is our intent. And that is what we intend to follow unless we're directed otherwise.
Right. Yeah. In fact, there has been questions raised about university students, not in Martin's Addition, but more generally around the country, about what their residences are and where they might
I should also
vote.
say, Mr. Chairman, that one of the guidelines we have has to do with the question of domicile and residence.
Right.
Apparently here in Maryland, they don't seem to be able to distinguish very clearly between the two concepts.
Right. That's right.
I, during my long federal career, was able to vote in the state of New York because the state of New York specifically says that you do not gain or lose residence in the state of New York by accepting federal employment, which seemed a very sensible way of doing things. And what we have done in practical terms is that we receive an official list of registered voters for this area from the Montgomery County Elections Committee. And where there has been any kind of doubt, we have consulted that to see if the individual was eligible.
Good.
I think, Mr. Chairman, that we have tried to be exceedingly conscientious of this, while at the same time offering the fair opportunity of those who are entitled to vote to do so.
Good. Thank you.
I would like
Yeah.
also to just mention for
Yeah.
a minute something in connection with the budget as a result of what Steve Schmal had to say before. I don't quite know what Mr. Schmal is getting at, whether it's a question of some excessive salaries being paid or excessive hourly rates being paid, something having to do with possibly that these people are exceeding their authority, possibly that these people are feather bedding and all that sort of thing. I would think that it is the council that supervises the village manager and that ought to be pretty much familiar, if not with the day-to-day operation, certainly with the grand sweep of the operations. I must say I've taken as much of an interest in the affairs of the village and how they're conducted, and in all honesty, I've never lost any sleep on the subject. And I would say that a good budgeting system which examines this thing really points in the direction of the council to make that sort of thing stick if there's any kind of a problem or be able to answer. So I'm not so sure what exactly the point here is.
Let me respond very briefly to that. Not only do we have oversight of the budget, we also sign the checks. And every check that I sign, and our treasurer isn't here tonight, but we've all signed checks on occasion. Very careful to look at the invoices, question the invoices, what is this for, what was that for, how many hours does this account for. I have, maybe I shouldn't say this, we're being recorded, but I have, in my mind, try to see, how could I fudge a system so that I could make away with $10,000, and I haven't figured out a way to do it. It's a pretty tight system with the numbers of checks and balances from several people signing the checks to an accountant who looks it over and presents the evidence to back it up. So it's a tight system in that regard.
Can I just add something
Yeah.
to that? So for both Steve and Frank, the idea is that we're going to get a little bit more granularity since it is our responsibility to know more about the contracts. That should be coming soon. And then that way, you know, our role is oversight of or management of the village manager, her role in managing the contracts. It's all very clear, but it's laid out there in a way that, you know, if a resident wanted to come in and say, what are the contracts that exist? How do things happen in the village? It'll be there and available for people to see.
Let's get some new, yes.
Anita DeFanis from Bradley Lane. I just want to be sure that I understand this voting for students. And I think Mr. Carell said that if there's a question, you'll look at the voting lists from Montgomery County or wherever, and yet we don't have a requirement in the village that you register to vote. So that voting list isn't going to help when you've got a student who says, I live on Bradley Lane, but they're not on the rolls of
That's, I'll let them speak, but the ordinance says that a resident may vote. There's no citizen requirement,
Right.
just an age and residency. So you might, Ted or Frank, do you want to talk about how you use the voting rolls to assist you in your work?
We have the voting rolls as a sort of a tool if it is needed. And the only time that we really need to refer to that is, on the one hand, when actually an absentee ballot comes in for somebody where there isn't a prima facie case that this individual should be voting. And secondly, and secondly, when we're actually at the table and someone comes and wants to vote and we have the village register in front of us and we cannot find that person, then we go and look in there to see that he is indeed shown as being a Montgomery County resident able to vote. Now, when the question comes up that here in Martin's Additions, non-citizens can vote, I can assure you that never ever has a foreign citizen come to the elections committee before an election and said, I want a ballot for my son or whatever it is. And quite honestly, I'm not quite sure that we would know how to deal with that without seeking additional guidance.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, and I just need to know, are you going to change that last sentence that's now in the absentee ballot, that appears in the website? So that you're gonna strike that last sentence that talks about non-residents having to apply in person to the village manager? Because you just said that was not operational. And that you'd use the same program as in the past, if college students want.
Dr. Richard, I'm not sure that I've got the same thing that people are reading from.
I don't
What
know.
I'm reading from, it says, residents of Martin's Additions who temporarily reside outside of the village may also obtain an absentee ballot. Requests for such a ballot must be made in person by a member of the household. Inquiries should be directed to the Elections and Ethics Committee or village office. I don't see what's wrong with that.
Okay, it's changed from what was on the website.
Well,
The website
I'm
is
afraid
different.
I'm not very technically adept. I haven't read the website.
Okay.
All I
So
know
will
is
the
what I
website
read
be
in front of
changed
me.
then? Maybe
So
that's
this
it.
is also the newsletter, which is on the website.
I'm sorry, Seth, I can't hear.
My fault. You're reading from the newsletter, which is posted to the website. If there's information that differs from that, I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, and we'll make sure that they coincide.
Thanks.
But this was the direction we gave, this was our intent, and this is the procedure we intend to follow.
Good, thank you. Yes.
Sorry, Steve Charm from Raymond Street. And not to belabor the point of the contracts, but a couple weeks ago, there was,
I can't hear, sorry.
a couple weeks ago at one of the meetings on the contracts, there was a number mentioned of about 30 or so material contracts, which is greater than $10,000 annually. But there wasn't a whole lot of information on those contracts. I wonder if it might benefit everybody if, when you guys get into the granularity that Tiffany mentioned, if that could be part of the public budget. And maybe it's $5,000 or $10,000, whatever the annual number is, but that way it's very clear, line item contractor, personal service contractor, whatever the professional service contractor, whatever the line item is, The more detail, the more transparency, I think is the better. I wasn't here for Steve Schwall's question, but he can clarify it. But I know that a lot of people have questions about where the money's being spent in real granularity. What's published to the community doesn't have that.
Right. There are 30-some contracts, they're not over $10,000. Some of them are much smaller, like the maintenance for the copying machine, things of that sort.
Yeah, we'll pick a number that's material.
Right,
If it's
right.
5% of the village budget,
Right.
which would be $13,000.
Right. But there are that many contracts, many of them quite small. And it was hard to find any that were really over, much over $10,000, very few. Okay, other, yeah, go, Josh, please.
This subject of the contracts comes up now and then, and the council's moving forward to find that out. But also, there is the Maryland Freedom of Information Act. Google it. It's plain language there. And I don't know an individual's rights to specifics because proprietary information would be excluded. But that's an avenue that's also open to residents.
Yes, I thought. Paula, did you have your hand
To
up?
petition that, you need to petition the village to...
Not petition, just write a letter saying in accordance with the freedom, I do this for a living, but in a different context. The letters are really simple. In accordance with the Freedom of Information Act, well, please provide the following, A, B, C, D. It's not,
As long as it's published to everybody, that would be wonderful.
yeah, but the council's moving forward, but that's also a backstop if you need it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Paul,
No,
identify.
And sorry to belabor the a question about the college
can you identify
students voting.
Identify,
Paula
okay.
Goldberg on Bradley Lane. In every other realm of the United States, an 18-year-old is of the age of majority, and in seeking medical care, it's not their parent who initiates their medical care. They need to initiate their medical care. So I was wondering if it might be a feasible, or it might be feasible, or might be a possibility that any 18-year-old who is at college could do an online application for an absentee ballot and identify their household and then scan it and just send it back to the village office without having their parents involved. Just a question.
It's,
Thank you.
I would say it's a possibility for the future, as we are developing, our website is constantly under development. Any other issues? Yes.
I see on the...
Name and street.
Sorry, Hannah Corell, Turner Lane. I see that there is still discussion about this election and appointment for the Village Election and Ethics Committee. And that it will be done in a closed session. Now, to run for the council, the candidates have to give out a statement about their personal interest, what they're doing, to even get in the running. I don't quite understand why somebody who is supposed to help with free and fair elections have to be discussed in a closed session and the public never even get to know who they are. Thank you.
The names, I'll give you the reason for that. The Public Meeting Act of Maryland provides 14 reasons for, or possibilities for closing a meeting. The first one is for the appointment, employment, or evaluation of appointees and employees. So that is the very first item.
But it doesn't say we have to.
It doesn't say we have to.
I do not question the council's right to discuss,
Yeah.
to appoint. I just think the public should know who these people are
Oh,
that
oh.
you discuss.
Well,
And
let me
that
go
we
through
should-
that.
We should be told what their qualifications
Yeah,
Well,
oh,
we should,
the,
the public should know the names and should see their statements.
They should not, I don't think they should be treated differently from
No.
candidates for the council.
yeah,
I'm one of the.
Well, we have several of the candidates right here tonight.
I'm happy to have everything
Yeah.
discussed, but it feels that it would be we're not elected, right? The
No,
members
you're-
of the
oh, you're
board are
appointed.
appointed.
Let me, yeah, go ahead.
Stand up.
What?
Can you stand up?
Yeah, do any of the candidates here tonight, why don't you stand up and we'll identify you? Just two tonight. Okay, we have
Three.
Paula Goldberg. Oh, three, I didn't see you in the back. So we have, thank you. And as we get into.
I don't
yeah,
even know how many candidates there are.
Five, I'll write them off. There are five candidates: Steve Trauern, Paula Goldberg, Naira Hack, Natalie Strauss-Welly, Chris Cole, and Molly Rule. And several other people have put their names forward and then withdrew when they saw what the schedules were and their own schedules. I want to thank Ted Stoddard, the chairman of the committee, for sending out a very useful, I'm going to use this in the future, list of the activities and what's being done. Because people always ask, what do you have to do? I say you have to count votes, you have to schedule, but he provided a very nice rundown of the kind of the schedule of activities. Little history on this. In the past, we have had great difficulty finding a single person. And we would call up people, everyone we know, could you do it, could you volunteer, could you be on it? And finally, we would find somebody who would say, yes, I'll do it, and say, great, you're it. This year, we had, at one point, 7 volunteers putting their names forward as candidates. And we had no procedure, we had no precedent of how to do this in the past. Because it was always a challenge finding one person. And so we were kind of doing this on the fly, coming up with, we asked everybody to submit statements about who they were and why they were on the, why they wanted to be nominated. So that's been the process. It's kind of doing it on the fly, actually. What we're tonight, there's just there's 3 people on the committee, or 3 people. The code specifies exactly 3 people. There's 2 people on there, 1 vacancy. There's going to be disappointed people. But I want to tell you, I particularly have been very interested in the fact that so many people are volunteering to do it. We know your names, we know where you live. So if you don't get appointed tonight, there is something in the future for you. Yes.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Linda Kirsten on Turner Lane. We've lived here since 1986, and I must admit I'm not the most tuned in to what the council's agenda is, but I've noticed that we've had 2 of these closed sessions in the last month, and I can't remember how many there have been before that. Is this a new? Is this a trend?
No, it's happening all the time.
All the time?
Yeah. Whenever we discuss personnel issues and other, yeah.
But how many times previously?
Once a year.
At least once a year.
Once a year.
Um, sometimes more.
I mean, it just. Well,
You got stand up, identify yourself.
Transparency, I think, is what we're getting at here.
What
Transparency.
Yeah.
What's done behind closed doors that
Well,
students don't know about.
The reason for closed door, as I say, there are these various exclusions where you can go when you close a meeting. And it's the only one that I can think of that we've ever used is discussion of personnel issues. You can do it for negotiating strategy, to get legal advice, for a number of other purposes.
We haven't answered a real question, which is why are we closing this meeting tonight?
I think because we'll be discussing individual candidates, and that it's in the exclusion is written in there for that purpose. Yeah, go on, stand up, identify.
Sally Mayer at Turner Lane. I thought that what the exclusion that you read had something to do with salary. There's no salary here.
No, it's the appointment of candidates. It specifically
and so
says.
Even though so this is still called personnel, since we.
Yeah, well, let me read you what
It's a different.
what the code says.
So the first one.
Right. Subject to the provisions of subsection and such, that a public body may meet in closed session or adjourn an open session to a closed session to discuss the employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluations of appointees. So let me just skip through that. The appointment of appointees. That's
Was
the
this done for previous, I remember Noel and Molly. Was that done in?
No, as I've said before, we've never had this situation before. Of more than one person to be appointed to this committee. So, you know, we found I hate to use the phrase, but we found a warm body, and they were the person. Yeah, please stand up.
Chris Cole,
Right.
Shepherd Street. As one of the people who has thrown her hat in the ring for appointment to the committee, I guess I have a slightly different view that is consistent with the Public Meeting Act that you raised. I think, yes, it's a good idea that the community should know who the people are who have expressed an interest in it, and if they want to know about their background. I mean, I don't care if you want to, you know, put on the website the little paragraph that we were all asked to write. But I do think, you know, the Public Meeting Act, just like the Federal Sunshine Act, exists for a reason. And anytime you're talking about anything related to personnel, whether it's appointment or an actual employee, you need to have a free and frank, candid discussion. And there can be a chilling effect on that, on the individuals who have the appointment power. So this, you kind of have to balance the need for transparency against the need for an honest and open discussion about, you know, who should be appointed to these positions.
Right.
And an appointed position, it's not the same thing as an elected position, where there obviously is a need for, you know, more discussion, like the candidates forum that's going to be held in a few weeks. That's different. Appointed positions are always different. So again, there's a question of a balance there.
Thank you. You said it better than I could. Thank you. Ted Stouter.
You have to reopen
Ted Stouter, attorney.
reviews and everything.
I've been on this committee for 25 years. Excuse me, Steve.
I'm sorry.
I've been on this committee for 25 years, and this is the first time that we've ever had an executive session before us. And I regret that, because although we've offered advice, it has never been solicited by the council. The memorandum that Arthur just mentioned was at our initiative. It was asked for by the council. And at this point, I just would like to say, well, I want to defer to Frank.
Frank, are you standing?
Yeah, you want to recognize?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. No, Frank, why don't you go ahead?
Mr. Chairman, I want to begin this by referring back to our meeting of the 19th of March, where once our general council session was coming to an end, you raised the question of whether the Elections and Ethics Committee had overstepped its bounds. And we had a very lively discussion for, I believe, over an hour. And we disagreed quite strongly. And once the session was adjourned, you came over to me and you shook my hand and said, I don't agree with what you say, but thank you for the work you do. And I must say, I found that to be a very moving experience. And I would like to do a little something in return for you tonight, which is to go over this whole business and ask you to consider where this is all leading. Ted Stoddard has referred to the fact that we offered, or we requested, the courtesy of consulting us in the picking of the third member to this committee. We never heard anything. I did see something about an opinion that that wasn't desirable. When the meeting of the 30th of March took place, once again, the question of appointing a third member to the committee was deferred because it was very obvious that there were some real problems from proceeding right at that point. And on the 30th of March, once again, I think it was on the 29th of March, we said, do what you will, but we would appreciate being consulted. We then saw a document that came out saying that we've had a lot of applications for this position, but we don't have a good way of deciding who to appoint, which quite honestly baffled both Ted and myself, because we would think that people were sufficiently acquainted with what's done at an election. Now maybe Ted and I know the nuts and bolts a little bit better, and we do the crap work, if I may say so, but let's face it, this isn't anything that's done in secret. In fact, it's done way out in the light of day. And after being once again overlooked, we drafted something that we sent to you and the council members and to the candidates, pointing out what we did and what we thought were the absolute requirements and the desired requirements for filling this job. Nothing had ever gone from the council that we knew that described what was wanted here, because according to your own statement, you said you didn't have any way of deciding. So it was we who furnished that information. I don't know to what extent any of the candidates or any one of the council members read it. I do know that we had one message addressed to me that said, withdraw my name from consultation because I'll be traveling. Which of course made me wonder how come that the volunteering had happened in the first place, and then it turned out that you got direct notice of someone else who was traveling, which once again made me ask the question, who's volunteering here, and why do they then pull back after they volunteered? Again, we've asked to be consulted, and quite honestly, where we stand at this point, one almost gets to think of the radio program I listened to as a boy when I first came to this country called It Pays to Be Ignorant.
That was one of my favorites.
And if you remember, there was the fellow,
right,
when he was asked what he did, he said, well, I was an electrician in a bakery and I put currants in the buns. And I get the feeling that this whole conversation here, this whole process between ourselves on the committee who've been doing this work and yourselves on the council and whoever is applying for this membership in this very sought after committee, it's like that kind of a thing. Now, we went one step further. And in our email of March 29th, which began with, hello Arthur, I've read your email inviting applications, nominations for the vacancy of the Elections and Ethics Committee. We said that in this connection we trust you and fellow council members will consult us veteran committee members regarding possible applications, and talking about the whole elections, and it was in full swing and what have you. And then came this paragraph. Taking all that into account, I would like to take this occasion to nominate Molly Rule of Delfield Street to become a member of the committee. As you may recall, Molly Rule served on the committee last year when we had a record turnout of voters, and I might add an exceedingly exciting election. Her role on election day, as well as her full participation in all the preceding donkey work leading to the successful election, was helpful in the extreme. She has agreed to serve once again if appointed, and both Ted and I would be delighted to work with her again. Now that's a recommendation,
Right.
and if I may say so, it's a recommendation that's based on some kind of a standard. We were able to determine some kind of a standard. Now, I haven't heard from any of the other applicants for this job, and therefore we weren't really able to do much. And since this was all held closely by the council, nothing more has happened. I'm not saying that there aren't qualified applicants. I don't know, but this is all being done in a fog, and that's not really what this village is about. I mean, if I may just read a quick thing here before I sit down and let somebody else have a chance to talk. I'm looking at the resolution that passed those ordinances that you referred to. That the Code of Ordinances is generally intended to represent a formalized set of protocols, rules and standards that reflect that reflect existing protocols, rules and standards within the village, and by which the residents of the village desire to live. Harmony, peace, good neighborliness, and all of the treasured attributes of living in our community will be preserved and enhanced by conformance with the standards set forth in these ordinances. And moreover, later on in that same resolution, it says, we believe that enactment of these ordinances will be viewed by future residents as an important step forward for the community, and trust that future members of the village council will share fully the philosophy expressed in this resolution. I don't think I need to say any more.
Okay. Thank you.
John.
John.
Speak.
The village council, by the admission of our chair, has been negligent in not paying enough attention to this critical committee, because the elections and ethics committee really is a type of steering committee for the whole village. They are the ones who preside over the election. They decide the elections. Last election, it was decided by one vote, that in a very large turnout. So it is a critical and it is a very important committee. And the fact that so many people have volunteered to be on the committee, I take as both a chastisement to this council, but also a really a plus for the village, because it means citizens are interested and are participating and do care. And I think that when we go through this and do fill out the committee and get its full membership to 3, I guess that's our total. We will be doing so, keeping in mind that that is really the steering committee and the heart of the village government of Martin's Addition. We're elected by the citizens, and we have appointed power and and all of this. But at the end of 2 years, our term is up, and the interim is fulfilled by the elections committee. And that really is important, if you stop to think about it, is who is presiding, who is in charge, who has authority when nobody has authority. And they do. That's why it's important.
Any other council members?
I think two things. I just, for everybody, these are 1-year appointments that this is my 3rd year to do this, and 3rd year to have Frank and Ted serving in their appointed positions. And our council the lawyer, our council in that term, has given us guidance on how people can volunteer. So it's not like tonight ends people's ability to engage in the elections process that's coming up right now and that's going to be time and labor consuming. So I worry that people will walk out tonight and say, okay, we're done, but there's
Sorry.
time. There is the ability to continue participating
Right, and
after
volunteering.
tonight.
And one other thing, as we got into this and had to look at the charter and the ordinance, we found some not inconsistencies, but areas where the charter says at least 3 members will be on the committee. The ordinances say exactly 3 members. We will be proposing changes to the ordinance to make it consistent with the charter, at least 3. And since we've had so much interest, we could easily add more people to the committee, but this will be after the ordinance passes. It takes time to introduce it, takes time to, a certain amount of legally required time. So if you don't get appointed today, it doesn't mean that we're forgetting about you. The future can be bright, and we would, I personally, I will follow up something that Steve said. One of the reasons I would have for enlarging it is to draw in more participation. Get people more involved. And it's something that we keep looking for ways to do, and this is an obvious way to do it. And it's just because the ordinance limited to 3 people right now that our hands are tied. And so there's only going to be selection of a single person. Any other comments from the floor? Yes.
I'm just wondering, is it possible?
Name and
sorry,
street.
I'm sorry, Alyssa Bean, Turner Lane. I'm just wondering, is it possible for us, for the residents to hear the bios that were submitted this evening before you go into closed session?
Yeah, sure.
Can we run them off and distribute them now?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Here. I don't have packs. Did she send one?
I didn't see one.
Okay. Yeah, we'll distribute them. This is one of the things that I find really encouraging, is that a lot of very experienced and thoughtful people who are volunteering. One more, Steve. Steve Trauern of Raymond Street.
While the copy machine is running, I want to make a comment about the memo that Ted and Frank put together, which is very detailed and very helpful on the elections. I think a great template for how they should run. It didn't have anything on I think the ethical side, and as the elections and ethics committee would imply, they probably should have some element of ethical.
It's in the charter.
But that's my comment. There was a comment that was made at the bottom that for desired requirements, which I understand is just a suggestion, but it limited it to the suggestions were former council members, former or current members of other committees, the tree committee and so forth, court committees. And for a committee that is assembled to facilitate democratic elections and ethical standards, it would seem contrary to that principle to eliminate eliminate 98% of the people in the village. And I think of the current candidates, well, I could be wrong, somebody please correct me. I think I'm the only one that doesn't fit that description, so it's still like it seemed. Hopefully that's not the case. I think everybody might be just the surface.
Okay.
But that would seem to me if you're really trying to increase participation in this village, this is why I'm getting involved. I want to help, because I want to help stimulate discussion and stimulate participation for all residents, not just a handful of residents who've been doing this for 20, 25 years, have served a long time, but to get fresh perspective, fresh sets of eyes, fresh ideas. You don't want to exclude everybody out of the gate. In order to do that, it would just seem unorthodox, to be fair.
Okay.
If I may respond
Right,
to
go ahead.
that.
Yeah.
The reason why there's been no mention with regard to ethics is because at the 19th of March meeting, as I recall it, you specifically said that you wanted to examine the whole question of ethics and what role the committee should be playing in that. And since our immediate job, and in fact the only job we've got left at this point, is to run this damn election for the next 4 weeks and 3 days, we weren't going to wring our hands about what you should do or should not do about ethics. And as far as desired qualifications, that's what they were, desired. It didn't say nobody else is eligible. In fact, I have to apologize to this group here because I forgot part of what I was going to say before. And I plead old age and approaching senility. But I was going to continue to say that if for some reason you wanted an alternate candidate for filling this position, we had a suggestion, and it came from the one statement that we had the privilege of seeing from the assembled applicant. And that statement came from Chris Cole, who described in very great detail her background as a trial lawyer for somebody who has dealt with difficult decisions for a long time and who has expressed a readiness to us personally to help with whatever can be done to participate fully in this. And we'd be damn fools if we were to ignore a form like that.
Right.
You presumably have received these essays. We have no idea what they say, and obviously you don't intend to share them with us.
Well, here they come. Here they come. Let me say, Frank and
Getting to the basic heart of the matter, we're trying to find a person to join this committee and participate in what's going to happen in the next 4 weeks and 3 days before this election ends. And just like Cinderella, you fade away.
Right.
Last thing, Frank,
Yeah.
your memo, Frank and Ted, you guys asked if anybody's read it. I have it.
I can't hear a word.
I have your memo. You asked, you didn't know, you said you didn't hear anything from the council members.
Yeah.
I read it.
I'm sorry.
I've got,
I told you I'm singing.
Frank, you asked, and Ted, you asked if any of the council members had read, even thought about, considered your memo. I have a hard copy of it here with me, with my notes on it. So, although it wasn't, I didn't respond to it, it's here. It's part of every consideration that I will have tonight.
And I think we owed Frank and
I
Ted.
don't know where your copy came from. I have one that is, maybe it's your printer or something, but I have one here which I can shuffle around and find, which was very, very easy to read.
No, I
She has it.
I
She has
printed it. I
It's
printed
just-
it from
she
my
has it.
email.
Frank, Ted, I wanted to say, I thought you should have been consulted. And I thought you were going to be consulted.
Their
the record.
their memo was provided the information. Okay, as I said before, we have plans to amend the ordinance to allow more members on the committee.
Arthur's gonna
Yeah.
introduce a
What?
change that will be
change.
discussed.
Yes,
A
that will be
proposed change
introduced.
That will be introduced.
Any more, thank you. Thanks for running it up. Any more comments from the floor? No? Okay, then it is time to move into closed session. I'm wondering, could we go out there and do this?
Why not?
And let everyone sit where you are, and we'll come back and, okay, stay where you are,
Except
If
for
you
those
want
who are
to, if
leaving.
you want
except for those who are leaving.
No, that's not an option.
Turn that off.
Once you're here,
You're stuck.
You stay, you